Hey guys, so for our next video we're going to talk about the function and motion at the elbow. In the last video we went over the structure of the elbow, so we went over some bony attachment sites, some muscular attachment sites, things like that. And today we're going to go over all the different functions and actions that are produced at the elbow. So when we think about the elbow, some of the major actions that we think about are the two big ones, flexion and extension. Okay, so flexion starts with a straight arm like this, and then we slowly decrease the angle at the elbow, just like that. So we bring the hand up towards the shoulder, kind of in that arcing motion, and we're flexing the elbow. Okay, that's accomplished by the biceps brachii muscle, coracobrachialis, as well as some brachialis muscle. All right, now extension would be the opposite way. Okay, so we would be starting from a flex position and we would be extending downward. So the angle of the elbow starts small and then it increases to be bigger, to about 180 degrees. Okay, this action is accomplished by the three heads of the triceps muscle. You have the short head, the long head, and the medial head, and that creates extension at the elbow. The two other motions that not many people associate with the elbow are pronation and supination. So typically when you learn pronation and supination, you look at what the hands are doing, okay? But that motion actually occurs at the elbow. So let's go over pronation first. Pronation is turning the palms downward, okay? So turning the palms downward towards the ground like that. And that's accomplished by the pronator teres muscle, which is kind of on the inner forearm here, as well as the flexor group, which is on the medial and anterior portion of the distal arm. Okay. Next we have supination, which is the opposite range of motion, where we're turning our palms upwards like this, and it's almost as if you're holding a cup of soup. That's a good way to remember it. Okay, so we're rotating at the elbow. Okay, the radius and ulnar kind of rotating about one another. That turns the hand up like that, and that motion is accomplished by the supinator muscle as well as the biceps brachii muscle. So now that you understand kind of the actions that happen at the elbow, let's dive a little bit deeper into some of the biomechanics that occur at the elbow. So when it comes to understanding the function and motion of the elbow itself, it's important to understand some of the loads that go into moving the elbow itself. So you have, let's say for example, when we do a bicep curl, we have external load, such as a dumbbell like in the picture, and then we have internal load being created at the level of the muscle. Okay, and we can understand the relationship between the external load and the internal load based off our torque equation that we mentioned in a few videos previously. Okay, so let's break this down and make this a little bit easier. So the torque equation is torque equals the radius, okay, times the force, that's the external force, times the sine of theta. Theta is going to be the angle of the elbow. Okay, so let's put theta right in here. That's the angle of the elbow. Force is going to be the implement. So right now we have a 10-pound dumbbell. That force is coming straight down, okay, because gravity's bringing that dumbbell straight down. All right, and then the radius is the point from the implement to the axis of rotation. So from the dumbbell all the way to the elbow, that would be the radius. And again, we're talking about the external force right now. So let's put an E there, an E there, and an E there. Okay, so the external force is dictated by the angle of the elbow, the force coming straight down, and the length of the radius. The internal force, again, is still the same torque equation, okay, but now we're looking at the level of the muscle. Okay, so we have the attachment site here of the biceps brachii, so that would be a shorter radius. That's internal radius. We have the force being produced, which is now going up because the bicep is pulling the hand upward. Okay, so that's internal force. And then we have the theta, which is our angle, again, but now of the muscle as it attaches to bone. So we have the external load, which includes the dumbbell in the hand, and then we have the internal load being produced at the level of the muscle. Now you can see here, as I bring my hand up through a full range of motion, the amount of force that I need to generate is different throughout different ranges of motion. So if I have, let's say, a dumbbell in my hand just like this, okay, doesn't take a lot of force to do this because, you know, there is no basically moment arm, okay? As I bring it upwards, it gets hard and I kind of hit a point where it's at its maximum difficulty, this is where that moment arm or lever arm is at its longest, and that's where I have to produce the most force with my muscle. This means in terms of perceived effort when I'm doing the bicep curl, this 90 degrees is really, where the money's made. That's where it's really tough. As I break that sticking point, it gets a little bit easier. Okay, now I'm obviously still trying to keep tension in the correct muscle, okay, but from a mechanics standpoint, I don't have to produce as much force up here, okay? Now it's important to note too that when we are, due to the mechanical disadvantage that the muscle is at, just because there's 10 pounds of force going straight down this way, due to the change in radius here from the muscle attachment to the length of the arm, my bicep has to create much more than 10 pounds of force, okay? So due to the difference in size of these radiuses, okay, so from here to here, it takes a lot more than 10 pounds of force from the bicep to overcome that long lever arm, okay? So that's an important concept to understand. This can get a little bit more confusing when you start talking about the sine of theta and how the angles change and all that, but that's kind of a, using the elbow is a good way to understand that torque equation and kind of understand how the resistance profile of different exercises changes. So when talking about the mechanical forces that go into the elbow during exercise and activities and things like that, it's important to know the ligamentous structures and the functions that they have within the elbow. The most important one we mentioned in the last video, the structure video, is the UCL, or ulnar collateral ligament. That's that triangular ligament kind of on the inner portion of the elbow here. So the job of the UCL is to prevent or check valgus motion at the elbow. So that's kind of the inward translation of the elbow, okay, in relation to the other joints. And when you look at different sports and activities, specifically throwing we're going to take a look at, the valgus forces at the elbow are very, very high when we are throwing overhand, okay? So if we think about the throwing motion like we talked about in the shoulder videos, when we're reaching behind the body like this, and we're kind of externally rotating at the shoulder, the elbow is typically kind of leading the way and my hand is lagging behind me. And that valgus position of the elbow is putting stress on that UCL, okay? So you obviously, when you're throwing, it's a high speed, high force activity, and all that stress and strain is going into the UCL, and that's typically why you're gonna see higher rates of UCL tears in overhand throwers, is because of those stresses. Now when we compare that to softball pitchers, okay, so they're throwing underhand this way, they're still generating a lot of force at the shoulder, okay, but in an underhand motion, and they're not putting their elbow into that valgus position as much and under as much force. So as they come through, all that force that's being generated just goes into the ball and is thrown, and the elbow remains a lot healthier, okay? So when you see softball players in softball teams, you don't see a lot of UCL injuries, and you see pitchers that are able to pitch a lot of innings without injury and really without any issues. So the other ligament I want to talk about is the annular ligament. The annular ligament holds the radius and ulna, kind of like is a ring around them like this, and allows the radius and ulna to rotate about one another without kind of like losing their relationship with one another. So if you look at the radius and ulna from this view, we have the ulna coming up medially and the radius coming up laterally. As I pronate, the radius flips over and kind of comes on top of the ulna, okay? So right now they're like this, and now the radius is on top and the ulna's on bottom, just like that. The annular ligament's job is to make sure that transition and translation of those bones is smooth and controlled, and that there's no unchecked range of motion. Now it is susceptible to more traction type injuries, so if I pull my arm and elbow out this way, there can be subluxation or dislocation of like the radial head, for example, okay? But again, the annular ligament's main job is to kind of make that transition during pronation and supination smooth and controlled. So from a biomechanical perspective, the elbow is a pretty simple joint, but it is a really common site for injury in athletes as well as the everyday population. So it's important to understand all the different forces that go into the elbow, some of the muscular attachments and ligamentous attachments, and kind of what those roles are in terms of keeping the elbow safe and functional. If you like the video, make sure you comment, subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you in the next one.